for those who don't know you, who are you and what is your role?
Right, well, I'm Pete Brown. I was born in Newport. My family go back a long way here. They were dock workers. I was brought up in Pill. I went to Bolt Street School and Dufferin. I've travelled a lot with my work over the years. I've done a wide variety of different jobs in the public, private and voluntary sectors, and I've been self-employed for about half of my life. I also have worked at the University at Culzean from 2004 until it closed last year. I was a lecturer and I ran a big European project and I did various things there. That's gone now, unfortunately, but I'm a distance tutor for another university. I do research work. I'm a lecturer on the lecture circuit, and there's a wide variety of things, largely research based and educational, things like that.
Sounds good. So why are you running for Newport East?
We had a surprise general election.
Yeah.
We weren't prepared for, and I suspect most parties weren't prepared for. And for various reasons, we didn't have a candidate in place. We weren't expecting the election, and I was asked to stand, and I agreed to do that. We always like to have a voice and an option for liberalism in Newport, and that's particularly the case at the moment with Brexit and the threat to the country as a whole. And we feel it's important that people have a good choice of parties and candidates related to that particular issue, which is a very dominant one.
So for those who don't know you, what are your policies, and also what are the main policies of the Liberal Democrat Party?
Well, there's quite a lot there.
Yeah,
I'll restrict it to two.
Okay.
The first one of those is all the issues around Brexit, and then secondly, I'll say something about the health and care sector.
Okay.
Regarding Brexit, we see that as the biggest issue of the day. It's the biggest threat that this country has faced since World War II. It has enormous implications if it isn't done in a credible way. We have been very clear since the referendum that whilst we respect that a referendum did give a result, it was a non-binding referendum. It granted no legal authority for the government to take it as a full license to do whatever it wanted. It was an advisory referendum. We were particularly concerned that it was very vague in its concept, and that there was an awful lot of really quite severe misinformation fed to people during the campaign against which they made that decision. What I find is particularly troubling is that even now we don't have a clue what's coming. We are told maybe there'll be a good deal. We were told originally we would get a deal that was better than being in the EU. Then we were told we would have a comparable deal. Now we're being told there's likely to be no deal at all. And if we leave the EU and the single market, and the single market was never on the ballot paper, so nobody voted to leave the single market, that's quite different. And you can be in the single market without being in the European Union.
Right.
And indeed, the Leave campaign, a lot of the leaders actually said we will stay in the single market.
Doesn't that all come into the negotiation, all of one thing, which is the negotiation of Brexit? Doesn't that come along with that?
Potentially, although if you rule out freedom of movement, as the Prime Minister has, and as the leader of the Labour Party has, then by definition you are out of the single market. What the European Union says is no cherry picking. You can't pick and choose the bits you want,
okay,
and ditch the rest. So if you say we will end freedom of movement, you're out of the single market. You simply cannot be in. So that's really, whatever you say about retaining links and benefits of the single market, it won't happen if you don't allow freedom of movement. So that's a profound decision to take. And it's worth adding as well, it's not just 27 countries, other countries in the European Union. There are 31 countries altogether within the single market. But it's not only that. We enjoy trade relationships with something like 57 other countries around the world by virtue of being a member of the single market. They are negotiated collectively, so we enjoy the benefits of that. Now, if we leave the single market, we leave all those, we have no trade deals with these 57 or so other countries as well. So it's not only the European Union and the single market that we're leaving, it's almost every other country.
But the businesses in those countries, they're not going to stop trading with us, are they?
No, but the framework within which we trade it is defined around the single market, the rules and regulations, the overarching management by the European Court of Justice, the common standards for employment, safety, environmental and so on. They're all wrapped up in that. If we leave without any agreement, then we basically don't have trade agreements with virtually all we have is a small number of bilateral agreements with specific countries. Now, all of those with every country, as well as with it's not just a question of a new relationship with the European Union, it's a relationship with the rest of the world as well. All those things would need to be negotiated from scratch.
Do you not think the UK is in such a good position that those countries would love to not mess us around and want to trade with us? Do you not have faith in the UK?
You could be right. I'd like to see evidence that gave me some reassurance of that. Blind faith and optimism and harking back to an imperial past, I'm afraid, doesn't give me the confidence that it will be that easy to set up or that quick. And then there's the issue of what happens to our trading when we get tariffs for our exports and we have to pay over the odds for our imports. Once we come out of the customs union, we have to start looking at what we're paying on top in order to trade with these other places that we don't have to now. Once the barriers go back up, then there's a question of what will it mean, what will it cost, how will we survive? Will these other countries want to trade with us? I'm sure they will, but it's the basis of that and the length of time to set it up. So that's a sort of general economic background. There's also the concern about employment. The press focuses a great deal on the finance sector and the jobs that are leaving from banking and so on. They're already going. They focus on the car manufacturers, but it's much more than that. This is going to have a massive impact on the agricultural sector, horticulture particularly. There's all sorts of ways it will affect that. Higher education that I'm involved with is already suffering effects and will continue to do so. So there's a whole series of sectors that the press is not necessarily looking at, all of which will suffer, and we will either see losses of jobs and closures, or we will see companies moving possibly. And so we feel that this is simply too big, it's too vague, and there has to be some clarity from the government of exactly what the option will be on the table if we leave the European Union, the single market. And if that option is not acceptable, and it's not what people were sold last year in the referendum, then we feel people should have an option of saying, actually, we don't want to do this because this is not what we were led to believe, and it will not put us in a better position.
Okay, you've expressed your concerns.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, people voted a black and white question, yes or no, leave or stay. Is it not fair, especially for a party that has democracy in its name,
yes,
to respect that?
Well, yes, but people who also voted for, I think, every party but UKIP 2 years ago, voted in the clear knowledge that those parties supported the European Union, supported the single market and all those things. You look back at the Conservative Party manifesto or the Labour Party manifesto, don't bother with ours, just look at theirs. It was enshrined in their manifestos that people voted for them. Now, you have to ask, I suppose, if you were an MP, that was your manifesto, the platform you stood on. People elected you on that basis. Now, against that is the referendum on the European Union that was non-binding, it was advisory, it was totally vague, and it was based on an awful lot of really quite malicious false information that people were fed.
You say
It's
that, but
already unravelling.
there's a lot of false information every
Yes,
time
indeed.
there's an election,
Yes.
and people still vote for a party, you know?
Yes.
So is it not up to us to put up with that now and just negotiate a deal? Is it worth bringing it all back up again in the hope that people vote stay?
Well, we believe people should have a choice on the final deal, and the fact that we still don't really know, almost a year, virtually a year, and we still don't really have a clue what will be there at the end of the table and what the long-term plan is. And I think that's very good. When you look at the jobs, the economy, our relationships in the world, and all these sort of the unbelievable complications that will come through trying to untangle over 40 years of collaborative working and integration. And I don't think the government's even begun to analyse what the problems and issues are, let alone what the solutions are. And I think it's the enormity of these that is really the concern here. And I don't think you can just say, yes, but there was a referendum and people said we want to leave, based upon what they were told. I think it's too big, it's too important for that. And if we get this wrong as a nation, we will pay a terrible price for decades to come.
We voted leave.
Yes.
So would a compromise for the Lib Dems be that we should do another vote on how we leave? You know, the in particulars, like you said about the single market, the cost of leaving, that sort of thing. What about that?
Yes, yes, indeed. I think our problem was the lack of clarity over what people were going to get. I think that's really the issue. And we feel that the people should have a right to say on that, not just Parliament. And if you think as well, the government has said, oh yes, you know, Parliament will get a vote on it. Parliament was forced by the Supreme Court to hold a vote on implementing Article 50. They fought that. They tried to stop it in the Supreme Court, and they lost. They did not want to. And then they ended up with a bill which I think was 136 words. It was almost comical that, you know, it was a token so they could say we've put a bill through Parliament. They did not put a credible bill to justify that. They rammed through something that was of utterly minimal detail just so they could be seen to comply with the instruction they had from the Supreme Court. Now, what I wouldn't want to see is them do the same thing again with a bill that was you know, like a couple of paragraphs long, to define something so big and say, well, we've done it. We have consulted Parliament. They've already shown that they will, in effect, treat Parliament with contempt by keeping the information to a minimum. And I don't think we should. I don't think that's good enough. And I think if the people gave a say on the referendum question, and I think when it's clear what the options are in full detail, there's a clear option of staying in versus leaving, then I believe that's the time for a referendum. And if people still choose that, that's absolutely fine. But I think they need to have a clear set of options. They didn't have that last year. They had a very vague principle.
So to make it clear, you're not asking for another referendum. You're asking to just make clear what we voted for.
The Lib Dems are...
Do you want another referendum?
Yes, it's
Okay.
A referendum on the deal.
Right.
It's not another referendum on whether we stay in.
Right.
It's a
So
referendum.
you've accepted that we're leaving?
Yes,
Right.
yes, we have accepted the result of the referendum. What we are saying is that was not based on a clear choice
Right.
of two options. And when there is a clear option of what the government has negotiated, then people should have a say of whether or not they still want to proceed or whether they feel that it's actually the wrong thing to do.
Right, okay. Moving on to the other point that Lib Dems are focusing on this general election, education. You've been a lecturer for 30 years.
Yes.
What do the Lib Dems want to do about education, for those who don't know?
Well, we've been concerned for a long time about the importance of education, the need for it in the economy, the need for it for building up the skill base and so on. And so we are proposing a wide range of things to do with education in terms of improving school standards, generally, much of which, of course, is a devolved issue. But also in terms of further and higher education, we feel we're lagging behind in terms of producing the people that we need with the right skills for the future of our economy and our country. We haven't got that right. We need a lot of restructuring. We need a lot of investment. Now, one of the problems that we're having, and we link back to Brexit again, I work in the university sector, and already we've seen a lot of damage. Several universities are now announcing redundancies because they are projecting the problems of losing overseas students. They bring in a lot of income to the universities. The collaborative research projects, a lot of which are across the European Union or with the European Union and other countries. We're no longer a partner because we're leaving the European Union. So we're now no longer involved in those bids. So
do you think that stops people from coming over and studying here?
It's already doing that.
Right.
Cardiff University this year, when the UCAS things closed, their applications from overseas students was down 15%.
So why do you think we don't have enough of homegrown students going to university? Why aren't our students filling those spaces?
That's a good question. One of the things related to that is that it's course specific. One of the things we need, what we have, I think we have too many people doing degrees in subjects which are not economically beneficial to them in terms of work. We have a shortage of people doing STEM subjects, sciences, technology, and things like that, management. One of the problems that a lot of universities have had for many years is that homegrown students don't fill those courses. They rely on overseas students to do the technical things, the engineering, science, the IT and so on. And they rely very much on the overseas students to make those courses viable. Now, if the overseas students don't come, it's not just that their income doesn't come to the universities, and all universities have become to rely on that as an income source. It's not only that, but if those courses cease to be viable because they can't get enough numbers, then the courses will close. And then we will not be training people in these vital areas that we need. So there's a knock-on, and then we haven't got those skilled engineers and scientists and IT specialists and so on. And so the university sector is already suffering from recruitment in key areas. It's losing its income. I think I read very recently there as well, it's something like 28 billion a year is the income to the country from overseas students.
Right.
That's the scale of the money that comes in altogether from overseas students who come here. Now, they're not going to stop, but they're already starting to fade away. And so we're looking here at potentially a very damaging situation to the universities whose job is to train the skilled people that we need for the future. This is not one the papers are talking about. They talk about the banks and they talk about the motor industry. They're not looking at some of these other sectors, but these are really quite major. Newport is already suffering from the closure of the campus at Killeen. I was made redundant along with thousands of colleagues only a year ago. So Newport is already in a situation that the opportunities for higher education have shrunk quite dramatically. You can still do pretty much everything you could do here, but you might have to go to Pontypridd to do it.
Right.
Now you can get to Cardiff, providing you haven't got childcare or mobility problems or whatever, you might have to do that. But we really don't have the infrastructure that can get you quickly and cheaply to Pontypridd every day, I suggest.
So what's your solution?
We already, I think, needed better access, either local provision or better access to the courses elsewhere.
Does that really stop people from going to uni, the distance?
It does, depending on your commitments, and it does depending on your ability to pay the transport costs. Right. If you have to travel 5 days a week.
Is it not something the government could help out with?
It is indeed. It is. So I think Newport's been hit. Not only have you got the issues that are sort of following on from Brexit, but you already have the problem of the dramatic loss of a lot of opportunities for people through the closure of the campus at Killeen. So we're in danger here of seeing people in Newport get left up with the tide, really. And I think quite urgently now, we need in Newport to be looking at what we're going to turn this around, to restore and maintain the opportunities to train the skilled people we need.
Okay, let's move on. In 2010, Lib Dems won 57 seats in Parliament.
Yes.
In 2015, only won 8. What
Yes.
happened?
What happened was we formed a coalition with the Conservatives because there was a hung Parliament. It was expected that they would be the largest party. We said that we would speak first to the largest party, and as a party that has been committed to pluralism and collaborative politics for generations, it was really no surprise that when faced with a hung Parliament, we sought to arrange a deal. A lot of people didn't like that, but it was really quite clear. Nick Clegg's comments were quite clear on this, and we found now a lot of people didn't like it, still don't like it, but the fact is the country was in a very difficult position so soon after the bank crash in 2008. We had an enormous budget deficit of £156 billion every year, which was making the debt spiral out of control. Something had to be done to give stable government, to allow business to proceed, confidence to be held in the country, and to work to reduce that deficit. These were difficult choices. Austerity happened because it was needed to bring the deficit down. People complain about it now, but you look back to what the other parties said they would do for austerity, and it wasn't actually a lot different. It needed to. We took a tough decision to take a hit, and it's nothing unusual that we suffered as the junior party in a coalition. Plaid Cymru worked with Labour a few years ago in the Assembly. They did a good job of putting together a government that worked, and they suffered at the end of that. So it wasn't just us, and it wasn't just being with the Conservatives. I think that goes with the territory of being a junior party in a coalition, if you agree that it's the right thing to do in the national interest.
Would you be willing to merge with another party to try and get back up there?
Difficult question. If there was another party, and if there was sufficient ground, and if both parties could find a common formula to agree, then yes. It's a hypothetical question, and I can't immediately think of any.
Well, do you think
option.
it would be beneficial at this time to merge with, say, Plaid or Green or UKIP?
UKIP, I can't see that, and I don't know where UKIP are planning to go now. Their raison d'etre was to get a referendum and get us out of the European Union. That's happened on the first part of it anyway, so I can't really say any more about that. I think a problem with Plaid, like the SNP, is that they want to break up the UK and they want an independent country. We don't. We believe in very advanced federalism within the UK. So I don't know that it would be possible to form, certainly not to merge. You could work with the party because they have a very similar view to Brexit as ourselves, as do the Greens. Now the Greens do share an awful lot of things in common with us, but then there are other differences in the way they operate. I'm not saying it isn't possible. It would be very interesting to look at it. I'm saying it would be very, very difficult, but it would be a very interesting thing to look at.
Okay. Staying on the subject of seats, you recently ran for local elections but
Yes.
weren't successful.
Yes.
What makes you think you can win the general elections if you can't win the local elections?
Well, the issues are very different. As I've already said, the big issue for us is Brexit and the impact on the country. That was not an issue. I think it came up twice on the doorstep. People raised it when they knew what party I was from. It was not an issue, and we weren't fighting. We were fighting on the council, its record, our previous record in the council, and local services and things like that. So it was really a very different thing. To us, the elephant in the room and the thing that overarches everything in national politics is Brexit and where the country is going, and that's what we're facing this on. We feel we've got a strong message, and we're offering people the opportunity to have an alternative, say, to this one of the prime ministers, that's it, we're leaving everything, we're not going back, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Okay.
And we feel people should be better informed and have a better choice than that.
Okay, so you're unsuccessful in the local elections,
Yes.
but if you do become successful as an MP for Newport East,
Yes.
What will you focus on? What will you do for Newport?
Brexit it will affect everybody. So we would expect, that Newport will suffer the same consequences if Brexit isn't managed properly. We also wish to look at a lot of. We're very keen on developing local infrastructure. We're very keen on developing business opportunities and so on. We would like to look and work with other partners to see how we can develop the local infrastructure to improve the economy, to improve jobs, and so on, within a credible and environmentally friendly context. So we're not just about Brexit. It just happens to be the subject which we feel is the dominant one because it will impact on everything else.
Okay.
But we would like to very much look at what we can do to improve opportunities locally and for the city and the people.
Is there anything specific you want to work on with Newport?
Well, I very much about skills and employment. That's something. I've been a training manager in a local authority in the past. I've worked for colleague Gwent. I've worked in a number of sectors, and I'm very interested in skill sets, skill development, and matching people to emerging opportunities. That's something I've done a lot through my life, so I'm very keen on that. One of the other things that I was working on at the university when it closed, we were very much a team of us were looking at exploiting the local heritage better. Newport has a fantastic local heritage story to tell, and we were actually looking at developing new curriculum to train people in heritage management that's appropriate. It's a big growth sector, and it's a sector that doesn't need more graduates in history and archaeology. There's hundreds of them who are unemployed, sadly. But what they need is people who understand how the heritage sector can be developed and managed economically, find how it can survive. We were developing that, and we had plans to help Newport to become a centre of excellence, to tap into this growth area of heritage tourism and be training the right people that the sector needs.
Do you still have that aim?
I've still got the aim. I don't have the vehicle now that the university's gone, because we can still teach the courses, but we can't accredit them, we can't badge them, which was a great pity, because with the Chartist story, the maritime story, the ship, the Roman sites nearby, the natural heritage, the castles, the medieval towns in Gwent and so on. We've got so much that is ideal for attracting. I mean, I know we already do that, but what we wanted to do was become a centre of teaching excellence around that as well, to develop the businesses that support that sector. So it's something I would still like to work on if there was some framework to do that.
Staying on the topic of employment,
yes.
What's your opinion on 0-hour contracts? Good thing or bad thing?
Well, it's a very interesting question. It's a very topical one. I work on 0-hour contracts. My university work is based on those.
Does that work well for you?
It works well. I work for the University of Leicester, which was actually my university where I graduated. I work for them on their distance learning programs. The contract I have with them is a 0 hours contract. I've had it for 21 years. And in a lifetime where I've nearly always been on short-term contract or self-employed, it's the best job security actually that I've ever had.
Right.
It suits me perfectly because I have caring commitments in different places. I need that flexibility to do the work flexibly, and I need to be able to say when I'm approached, I'm busy over the next few weeks, please can you send this work to somebody else and come back to me. So it suits me perfectly. One of the problems with 0-hour contracts is that the press, and sadly to say some politicians, only ever look at certain employers, virtually always in retail and services, and they look at the exploitative elements, and they try to lump together all 0 hours contracts as being very bad, very negative. In fact, the evidence is fundamentally different than that. About a quarter of people on zero-hour contracts are students who need the flexibility. They don't want to be tied, they can't be tied, and they're quite happy to do casual work when it comes up. They don't want to lose that.
What about the rest then, who depend on 8 hours a day, 5 days a week to pay for their bills, who are
Yes.
not getting that because the employer is allowed to not give them hours?
Yes, well, it is a problem, and one of the things in our manifesto is to look again at where there are exploitative issues, where the law can be tightened. It's worth saying that we took action, Vince Cable under the coalition government took action against exclusivity clauses, which basically, where you had a contract with somebody who didn't guarantee you work, but he said you couldn't work for anybody else. That was absolutely scandalous.
Yeah.
They were banned in law by the coalition government. Now, that was taken, that was the first legal action that had ever been taken against exploitation. I think there will always be scope to look at it again and to tighten it up, and we've said that we will do that.
Are you not fearful that if you tighten the law, as you say, on employers, that they'll not employ many staff, which will then make unemployment even bigger?
Well, worse than that is the current plan in the Labour manifesto to ban them altogether without any investigation or without any qualification. They have simply said we will ban them and we will force people to give a set number of hours every week. Now that would, I fear, that would put me out of work and hundreds of thousands of other people. It will cause immense damage to employers. I think it's badly thought through. I think it's opportunist, and I thought it's very much for election purposes. I think it's really quite unfair to people who are generally very happy, and the surveys often show that most people who use zero-hour contracts are actually very happy with them.
Most people?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I'm a chartered member of the Institute of Personnel and Development, and we, as an institute, study things like this and produce the main research papers. About 3 years ago, we produced a paper, and it actually came up with the astonishing finding that of the respondents, those on zero-hour contracts reported a higher rating for work-life balance than people on other types of contract. Now,
Right.
you have to read that report because people don't believe you.
No, yeah.
It was quite illuminating because so many people who work on zero-hour contracts simply can't be tied to set hours because of the nature of their commitments, their demands. I had caring commitments over many years and so on. I just think banning them is the wrong thing. Having said that, Tony Blair said in 1995 when he became party leader he would ban them, and they didn't do it then. So I suspect this is another one. Really, it's a nice soundbite in the manifesto. I wonder if they would do it this time when they didn't do it last time.
Okay, so do you think Lib Dems would be a better opposition than the Labour Party right now?
Well, yes. I mean, one of the sad things I've seen over the last 2 years is the sheer lack of opposition from Labour to the Conservatives when they don't have a big majority and they're operating in really a very cavalier fashion about all sorts of things. This lack of clear opposition, I think, has been regrettable from Labour. And it's interesting how many times Labour has simply rolled over or sided with them or rolled over. And when you consider that the stick we got for working with the Conservatives in a negotiated coalition government, I think it's very disappointing the lack of an effective opposition and the free rein that it's given the present government.
Okay. You said in your manifesto that you'll get 6 billion from adding 1 pence onto corporate tax, is it?
Income tax.
Income tax.
Yes.
And you want to put 7 billion into education. Where does the other billion come from?
I think, aren't you talking about...
So 7 billion wants to be invested into education.
Right.
6 billion of that will come from income tax, 1 penny. Where does the other 1 billion come from?
The 6 billion, I think, is for the NHS.
Right. Okay, sorry.
It was a penny on income tax
Right.
across all bands, specifically earmarked for the National Health Service.
Okay.
Now, in Wales, that's a devolved administration, the NHS, but that money, whilst collected centrally through income tax, would be passed on to the Welsh NHS. So yes, that is a flagship commitment to, and it's quite a bold thing. No government likes raising taxes. They never have, and they never will. We took the decision that the NHS and the health and care sector really do need money. They need a long-term plan, and that we took that decision. We felt that people would understand that that penny on the income tax was needed, and it was for a very good cause. And our plan is to give that better funding, and there are other issues we want to do as well to improve the NHS.
What are those other aims?
One of them is about dealing with the shortage of staff. There's already a shortage of staff at various levels, doctors, nurses. We already have something of a crisis. I suspect that the recent withdrawal of the bursaries for training nurses, I appreciate that's in England, but that's going to reduce the number of applicants. My daughter recently qualified last year as a nurse, and she was attracted to it. She wanted the job, but also because it was there was a bursary. It was a very attractive proposition. Now that will not help the situation. Plus, of course, we rely so heavily for skilled staff in the NHS on people from other countries in the EU and elsewhere. Now, though we're already seeing fewer people coming to work in the NHS from the EU, and we are starting to see fewer people coming from other countries because of these issues of tightening up on immigration, whether people will maintain their rights, all these things that the papers are full of. So what we're seeing, I think, is a problem of staffing. We're seeing that problem getting worse for several reasons, and no plan to deal with it. Now that's what leads to overworked staff, poorer care, crisis. People leave because they're fed up with it and so on, and the whole thing will spiral out of control. We've taken the decision that we will work to get the funding. We will work to address the staffing. The other thing we're doing very briefly is that we recommend several commissions and investigative bodies that will look at the plans for health and care, how to integrate them more closely, how to plan for them in a cross-party way for the future, how to look at the funding required, because too much of decision making about the NHS is taken short term for 5-year periods and for the benefit of voters at election. And it's quite clear that the demands of the NHS and its needs need a strategic view. And that's what we are proposing to pull everybody together on.
Right, okay. One of Lib Dem's pledges is to end imprisonment for possession of illegal drugs.
Yes.
For personal use.
Yes.
Is that turning the other cheek on a serious crime?
Well, it depends. It's not applied to everything. I mean, you have to look at it. Prohibition of alcohol didn't work in America. Prohibition of prostitution has never stopped it anywhere in the world. Now, I think we have to look at it at the issue of the nature of the drugs, and we're talking particularly here about cannabis. But what we're looking at is the health issues that come from an unregulated market. We're looking at the criminal profits and element of it. We're looking at the lack of health care associated with it because it's an unregulated provision and an unregulated sector.
So if they don't go to jail, where do they go? What happens? What is the punishment for owning illegal drugs? What we are saying
is that we should decriminalise it in the sense that it isn't an automatic criminal offence. And you have to ask as well, does it, if you jail somebody for possession of cannabis, does it actually stop them using it? And what does it do to their life if they suddenly have a criminal record? You know, how does it affect them in the round? What we're saying is we want to look at dealing with it in a more mature way that regulates it, that frees up police and criminal justice time in dealing with what is I think many people would see as a very minor thing, and it's not always an awful lot different than alcohol. That's often the parallel that's drawn.
Yeah.
And what we're
But I
saying
think-
is we need a more mature look at that.
I think if you break the law, you break the law, don't you? You know, don't do the time, don't do the crime
Well,
all the time.
Yes, but it's a question of where is it going in terms of the issue of these cannabis-type incidents, and would we be better to treat it in a more mature way, as indeed other countries do, and some states in America do,
What way is that?
which is to decriminalise it, to allow people to deal with it, to treat it as a health issue if they want support with it, which they wouldn't come to if it's a criminal thing, to look to cut out the criminal element and the profits, to regulate it so anything bought by people is properly controlled and is safe, and it will actually turn a profit as well,
Right,
that
I
can
see.
go into health and support for anybody who sort of wants that.
What is the purpose of this pledge? Is it to keep prison numbers down? What is the
Well,
purpose?
Partly because we think it's the right thing to do,
Okay.
partly, as you correctly say, to keep prison numbers down. One of the things I've done as a prison teacher, I was the computer teacher
Right.
in Leicester Prison for 3 years. It was a Category A, top class, highest grade prison, and I worked there. It was perhaps the most illuminating teaching I've ever done. It was very unusual. And it struck me when I was there that most of the people I had in the classroom should not have been in prison.
Right. Okay.
They were basically okay people who were there for the wrong reasons. And yet you hear stories all the time about people who are on the streets who plainly should have been in prison. And I think the time has come, we need to look at all of that and use prisons much more effectively to jail the people who need to be in prison. And look at other ways of dealing with people for whom perhaps putting in prison is actually unhelpful to them and to society.
Okay. What would you say to the people of sort of high morals who don't agree with you and agree with changing this law?
Oh, I understand that entirely. It's not an easy subject. One of the people I have as a Facebook is a man called Peter Reynolds, who's one of the leading campaigners for the legalisation of cannabis, who incidentally was born in Newport. Right? He told me that. Very few people actually know that. He's one of the leading campaigners, and I love to look at the articles he writes and things like that. And I've become convinced that there is a much more mature way of dealing with that. I'm not saying it shouldn't be debated. We shouldn't look at all the safeguards. We shouldn't take on board all the concerns. What I'm saying is the current systems don't seem to me to be doing a good job. It's too tough a view. The operation is too big for what's needed. A hammer to crack a nut, and I don't think it's bringing about a good result for the country, for society, or for the people involved. The people who get a good result out of it, by and large, are the criminals.
Right. Okay. The unemployment rate in Wales is higher than the UK's as a whole,
Yes.
at 4.8% at the moment.
Yes, indeed.
If elected, what will you do to get people back into work?
Well, as I've already said, I'm keen on infrastructure developments and various things that can be promoted to bring in more opportunities that will create work for people. I'm also, again, as I've already touched on, I'm very interested in skills upgrading, better identification of current and projected skill needs for opportunities in the area, and looking at how they can be provided so that when those opportunities are there, people are competitive for them. So I would see it as a combination then of infrastructure development, improving job opportunities available, and upskilling widely to equip local people so that they can be effective in their applications.
Do you feel there's more unemployed people than there are job roles or job vacancies at the moment?
Yes, I think there are, and I suspect there probably always will be. There was a time some politicians used to aspire to zero unemployment. I'm not sure that was ever really attainable, to be honest. It was a great idea. I'm not sure it would have ever worked in practice for all sorts of complex reasons. What concerns me is that there are so many people who simply fall by the wayside. And when somebody doesn't work for years, there's then all the social implications. Some of them will turn to crime. Others will simply become ill, get depressed. There will be social unrest. There will be health implications, pressure on the health and care services, and so on and so on. So it's not good to have people who want to work and are capable of working not working. It's bad for them. It's bad for society as a whole. So I think it's really incumbent on us to do what we can to give people who want to work the best opportunities we can, and that's true at local level. It's true at national level, both in Cardiff and in London. And I would like to see strategic plans for Newport that will address that.
When Friars Walk came here,
yes,
it flooded with employees. It was instantly full. But in the high street, we've got so many empty stores. Is it not that put the stores there that people will come?
Yeah, this is a problem we've had in Newport for many years, and it's shared with dozens and dozens of other places. I think the problems probably started with the growth of out-of-town shopping precincts, like Spitty, like the one at Maysglass and so on, and the old road at Mentley Road and so on. And I think they were a fashion. They were the thing to do back in the 70s, 80s. And I think too many people were carrying. It looked great. Far too much attention was paid to people with cars, and people who didn't drive tended to be left out. And what you had then was a migration away from the city, and where forever market towns were magnets that pulled people in. The magnets were placed outside, and so the people who came into town tended to be people who didn't have the cars, and there was fewer and fewer things for them.
So you blame that on shops closing and there not being attention in the high street?
I think it's a problem. Decisions were taken at local level to take the chief shopping areas out of the centre, and invariably that set in a slow decline, which accounts for the number of void properties that you see and that we've had for really a very long time.
But also now the rent is really high. It's very hard for an independent or entrepreneur, or even established shop, to rent here in the high street and make money. Yes. So what's the solution?
Well, I think Friars Walk took a long time coming. There were all sorts of problems. It was the third attempt to develop the centre. I think overall it's been good. I know there are some issues. I know there are some occupants who've already closed and so on. It isn't perfect, but I think it's worked. People generally like it. The footfall has been good, and I think it's what the city needed.
I don't mean the rent about Friars Walk. I mean the rent in the high street.
Yes.
So all the empty stores. Yeah.
Well, that is something that things can be done.
Because there are no empty shops in Friars Walk.
Yeah, I believe that there's pump priming that can be done. There are special grants. There's initiatives that we can do. I think we need now. People are coming. What we don't want is people to just come to go to Friars Walk and Kingsway. I know you tend to park underneath and then you go up and you shop and so on. And I think what we need is to look at how can we engage people more fully with the city, with the other shopping areas and the other attractions here. And one of the things that we plan to do, the previous council, when Friars Walk was agreed, and it was incidentally, the agreement to go ahead, that was agreed by the coalition that ran the council before 2012. It wasn't actually agreed by the latter, despite what they say. Right. It was actually agreed by the previous one. And the original plans, which were heavily influenced by my colleague who held the culture portfolio, was to have the Newport ship as a showcase museum in the middle of it. Now, in the end, that was pulled out of the design before it was built. But the plan then was to integrate the heritage with the shopping and with the other entertainment and food and so on. And so what we want is more things that will pull people into Newport, make them stay longer, make them do more, make them stay more. And I think if we can do that to widen out the net of why people are here and where they go, then I think we can make it attractive, much more attractive than just the actual shopping malls that we have now.
Okay. A question I got from social media is, how are the Lib Dems supporting or plan to support and be a voice for the gay and bisexual men in Chechnya facing prison, physical abuse and torture for being themselves?
Right, that's a good question on a truly terrible subject thing that's happening. Our position on this is quite clear. We are appalled by it. We are outspoken in every way. We lobby the government, although I don't think they actually need any. They don't need convincing. I think the government, the diplomatic service, is making itself very clear that we are wholly opposed to this. We find it quite unacceptable. We are lobbying, and we know that the government is taking on board the views that we fully support and share with our other party colleagues, that this is quite a disgrace, wholly unacceptable. And I hope that our government continues to work with other countries to press this. One of the advantages we have, of course, through the European Union is that we are able to lobby with greater strength than we can just as the UK. And this is the sort of thing where I think our membership of the European is better for lobbying for things like that as a collective body than just our country.
Okay. Just to end on then, is there anything that you haven't mentioned that you will do if elected to help Newport and help the country?
No, I think I've covered the key areas that I wanted to. We are very keen on creating what we refer to as an open and tolerant society. We are concerned, one of the knock-on effects of the referendum has been a quite alarming spike in hate crime in all sorts of ways, and they've risen quite alarmingly, and we've seen, I think, levels of intolerance that I never expected to see in this country. I think far too much emotion was pumped into the EU referendum. Far too many people have read too much into it, and I know people personally from other countries who've had personal abuse and suffered from it, and not all from the European Union either. But nevertheless, this is something that's fallen in train, and I think we badly need liberalism, a more open and tolerant approach, more in line with what this country has always been respected and regarded for. We've been a country that's always welcomed refugees after wars and things like that, and I find it quite shameful now that we're trying to shut the door even to children from Syria who have no family. I find that quite disgraceful, and we would hope that we can restore some of that tolerance that we seem to be losing to some extent.